the eternal voice.
Like and subscribe if you dare to step beyond the veil of comfortable certainty, because what unfolds in the next hour will plant seeds in the dark soil of your consciousness, seeds that will sprout in the quiet moments between sleep and waking. Tonight, we explore a question that serves as both key and gate, both veil and void. What if the great dreamer beneath the Pacific opened his eyes tomorrow? Not in some distant theoretical future where humanity might be prepared, but tomorrow. While you sleep tonight, while the tide pulls and the stars wheel in their ancient patterns, while the deep places of the earth hum with pressures older than continents, the question itself is a forbidden threshold, and crossing it carries a cost. Not insanity lost all at once, but in the slow, sweet erosion of the certainties that keep you anchored to the stage of ordinary existence. You are already in the audience now, and the curtain has begun its inevitable rise. For nearly a century, since a Providence recluse shaped certain syllables into a name that behaves like a virus in the alphabet, we have carried fragments of this knowledge. Cthulhu, the word itself a broken hinge in language, a reminder that some truths require new organs of perception to even approach. The entity it names sleeps in Relaya, that impossible city whose geometry makes mathematicians weep and whose very existence is a wound in the fabric of what we call real. But sleep, in cosmic terms, is not absence. It is preparation. It is the slow, patient accumulation of dream pressure that will, when the stars align in configurations that hurt to contemplate, translate into waking force. The mechanics of such an awakening operate on principles that make our physics seem like children's games with blocks. This is not about a monster rising from the sea, though that image serves as a comfortable reduction, a way to contain the uncontainable. This is about consciousness itself recognizing its true scale, about the moment when the dreamer realizes the dream and begins to edit the source code of existence with the casual attention of someone adjusting the temperature in a room. The air itself would thicken with significance. Water would remember purposes older than erosion. The stars would not move, but they would reveal that they were never where we thought they were, that our constellations were always wishful thinking, patterns imposed on a sky that follows utterly different rules. Consider the stages of such an event. First, the sensitives, artists, madmen, children, those whose minds already operate at the edges of consensus reality, would begin to dream in unison. Not the same dream, but dreams that rhyme, that echo each other across continents like a vast, unconscious choir, learning the same impossible hymn. Scientists would notice anomalies, deep-sea sensors registering pressures that correspond to no known geological activity, radio telescopes picking up signals that seem to originate from beneath the Earth's crust, tidal patterns that pulse with the rhythm of something vast and patient, stirring in sleep. The second stage would be recognition, not understanding. That luxury is reserved for smaller revelations, but the terrible, unmistakable awareness that something fundamental has shifted. Governments would convene emergency sessions to discuss phenomena that their experts cannot explain, while in basement apartments and university libraries, individuals touched by the expanding dream pressure would begin to speak in tongues, to paint geometries that exist in too many dimensions, to write equations that solve themselves and reveal truths about the universe that were never meant for human minds. But here is where the true horror reveals itself. The awakening would not be violent in any sense we understand. Violence implies conflict, opposition, the meeting of forces with incompatible goals. Cthulhu's emergence would be more like weather, vast, impersonal, utterly indifferent to human concerns. We are not his enemies. We are not even his subjects. We are simply here, temporary arrangements of matter and consciousness. that happened to exist during his transition from sleep to waking awareness. The stage was set long before we learned to walk upright, and the drama that unfolds upon it operates by rules that predate our species, by epochs. This is the promise and the warning. To understand what happens when Cthulhu wakes, you must first accept that you have always been part of his dream. Every choice you have made, every moment of inspiration or terror or wonder has been guided by pressures emanating from Arlaya, subtle influences that shape the trajectory of human consciousness toward this inevitable moment of recognition. The idea acts on you. It has been acting on you since you first heard the name, since you first felt that peculiar chill when staring at the ocean on a foggy night, since you first experienced that sense of being watched by something vast and patient and utterly other. The chapters that follow will trace the lineage of this influence, explore the mechanisms by which dream becomes reality, examine the specific scenarios that might unfold when tomorrow becomes today. But know this, you are already implicated. The knowledge changes you in the having of it, and there is no returning to the comfortable ignorance that once served as your shelter. The curtain rises not because we pull it, but because the stage requires the next scene to begin. The name Cthulhu did not spring from nothing. It emerged, like all true horrors, from a lineage that stretches back through layers of human memory to sources that predate our species entirely. To understand the awakening, we must trace this inheritance, not through academic genealogies or literary influences, but through the deeper currents of transmission that flow beneath the surface of recorded history, like underground rivers carrying sediment from ancient, drowned continents. In 1926, a Providence recluse named Howard Phillips Lovecraft received what he described as a hideous dream that would reshape the landscape of human fear. But Lovecraft was not the origin. He was a conduit, a particularly sensitive receiver, tuned to frequencies that had been broadcasting from the depths for millennia. The dream that came to him was not his own. It was a fragment of something vast and patient stirring beneath the Pacific, a whisper from Relaya that found in his troubled mind a suitable instrument for its translation into human language. The story he wrote, The Call of Cthulhu, was not fiction but documentation, a careful recording of truths that had been seeking expression through human consciousness for ages beyond counting. But the transmission predates Lovecraft by centuries, by millennia. In the archives of forgotten monasteries, scholars have found references to the sleeper in the deep in texts that were ancient when Rome was young. Polynesian navigators spoke of islands that appeared and vanished with the tides, places where the water grew thick and dark and filled with whispers in languages that predated human speech. Norse sagas contain fragments of verses describing a dreaming god beneath the waves, whose stirring would herald the end of the world tree and the beginning of something that had no name, because it required no names. The Narcotic manuscripts, those pre-human texts that surface periodically in the collections of mad bibliophiles, speak of the great old ones in terms that suggest intimate familiarity rather than distant worship. These beings were not gods in any sense that human religion can accommodate. They were principles, fundamental forces of a universe that operates by rules older and stranger than anything our physics has discovered. Cthulhu, according to these fragmentary records, was the architect of dreams, the entity responsible for weaving the fabric of consciousness that allows awareness to exist in material form. His slumber was not weakness, but work, the careful construction of a reality stable enough to support the emergence of minds capable of recognizing their own cosmic insignificance. The transmission operates through multiple channels simultaneously. There is the literary lineage, Lovecraft to August Derleth to Ramsey Campbell, To Thomas Ligotti, each generation of writers adding layers to the mythos while believing they are creating fiction. But this is merely the surface current. Beneath it flows the deeper transmission through dreams, through the collective unconscious, through the strange synchronicities that bring certain individuals into contact with knowledge they never sought and cannot explain. Artists paint images of cyclopean cities without knowing why. Musicians compose melodies that seem to contain extra notes, harmonies that exist in the spaces between conventional scales. Mathematicians discover theorems that describe geometries which should not exist, but do, lurking in the corners of equations like shadows cast by objects in dimensions we cannot perceive. The cults that worship Cthulhu are not organized religions, but spontaneous eruptions of recognition. They arise independently in locations scattered across the globe, connected not by communication but by resonance, by the shared experience of minds touched by the same vast dreaming presence. Their rituals are not attempts to summon Cthulhu. Such efforts would be like trying to summon the tide or the turning of the earth, but exercises in attunement, practices designed to align human consciousness with the cosmic frequencies that emanate from Relie. The chant Funglui Munglwanaf Cthulhu Relie Vugah Nuggle Ftagen is not a prayer but a tuning fork, a sound that resonates at the precise frequency needed to open channels between the dreaming mind and the dreaming God. Modern technology has accelerated the transmission in ways that would have been impossible in earlier eras. The internet serves as a vast neural network through which fragments of the Cthulhu mythos spread like a benevolent virus, infecting minds across continents with concepts that prepare them for the eventual awakening. Video games allow players to explore virtual Arlias, to walk through impossible geometries and experience, in safely mediated form, the disorientation that comes from exposure to spaces that exist in too many dimensions. Films and television shows plant visual seeds, tentacles emerging from fog, stars arranged in patterns that suggest malevolent intelligence, the sound of something vast moving beneath dark water. But perhaps the most significant vector of transmission is the phenomenon that researchers have begun to call cosmic synchronicity, the tendency for individuals with no apparent connection to independently develop similar insights about the nature of reality, consciousness, and humanity's place in the cosmic hierarchy. Quantum physicists discover that consciousness appears to be fundamental to the structure of reality. Neuroscientists find evidence that individual minds are nodes in a vast network of interconnected awareness. Astronomers detect signals from deep space that seem to pulse with the rhythm of something alive and dreaming. These discoveries are not coincidences, but symptoms of an awakening that has already begun, ripples spreading outward from the epicenter of Cthulhu's stirring consciousness. The inheritance we carry is not just literary or cultural, but genetic, embedded in the structure of human consciousness itself. We are the descendants of minds that were shaped by exposure to Cthulhu's influence, generation after generation of subtle selection pressure favoring those individuals capable of surviving contact with cosmic truth without complete psychological collapse. The capacity for horror, for awe, for the recognition of our own insignificance in the face of vastness. These are not bugs in human psychology, but features, adaptations that prepare us for the moment when the veil is finally lifted, and we must confront the reality of our situation without the comfort of ignorance. As the transmission continues and accelerates, as more minds are touched by the expanding influence of the stirring dreamer, we approach the threshold where recognition becomes inevitable. The lineage that began with whispers in ancient texts and dreams in the minds of sensitive artists is converging toward a moment of collective awakening, a point where the accumulated pressure of transmitted knowledge reaches critical mass and the boundary between dream and reality dissolves entirely. The stage is set, the audience is seated, and the curtain trembles with anticipation of the revelation that awaits. To comprehend the true scope of what approaches, we must examine the mechanisms by which a sleeping god exerts influence across dimensions, through time and into the very structure of consciousness itself. This is not telepathy as science fiction imagines it, crude mind-to-mind communication across space. This is something far more sophisticated and terrifying, the ability to edit the source code of reality, to adjust the fundamental parameters that determine what is possible and what is not. Cthulhu's power operates through what we might call consciousness architecture, the deliberate construction of frameworks within which awareness can exist and evolve. Consider the ocean as the primary medium of transmission. Water, that simple molecule that covers most of our planet's surface, serves as both conductor and amplifier for the psychic energies that emanate from our Laya. Every drop contains trace minerals from the deep places, microscopic particles that have been in contact with the impossible geometries of the sunken city. When this water evaporates and falls as rain, it carries with it subtle alterations in its molecular structure, not chemical changes that instruments can detect, but informational modifications that affect how consciousness interfaces with physical reality. The fog that rolls in from the sea is not merely atmospheric moisture, but a delivery system for dream fragments, carrying whispers of Relia into the minds of all who breathe it. The mechanism operates through what researchers in the hidden corners of quantum mechanics have begun to call consciousness resonance. Just as a tuning fork will cause another fork of the same frequency to vibrate, minds that have been exposed to Cthulhu's influence begin to resonate with the vast dreaming presence beneath the waves. This resonance creates feedback loops. The more a mind aligns with the cosmic frequencies emanating from our Leia, the more sensitive it becomes to further influence, and the more it begins to transmit those frequencies to other minds in its vicinity. Artists become unwitting broadcast stations, their work serving as antenna arrays that spread the signal to anyone who views or experiences their creations. The architecture of this influence extends beyond individual minds to encompass entire cultural systems. Languages begin to shift subtly, developing new phonemes that more accurately reflect the alien concepts seeping into human consciousness. Mathematical systems evolve to accommodate geometry that exist in spaces between the familiar three dimensions. Scientific paradigms gradually expand to include phenomena that were previously dismissed as impossible or irrelevant. These changes occur slowly enough that each generation accepts them as natural evolution, never recognizing that they are being guided by an intelligence whose perspective encompasses geological timescales. But the most profound aspect of Cthulhu's architectural influence lies in his manipulation of what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness, the mystery of how subjective experience emerges from objective reality. Cthulhu does not solve this problem. He reveals it to be based on false premises. Consciousness does not emerge from matter. Matter emerges from consciousness, crystallizing out of the vast dreaming mind like ice, forming on the surface of a cosmic ocean. What we experience as physical reality is actually a collaborative hallucination, a shared dream maintained by the collective unconscious of all sentient beings, with Cthulhu serving as the primary dreamer, whose vision provides the stable framework within which smaller dreams can exist. This understanding transforms our perception of mental illness, artistic inspiration, and mystical experience. The individuals we label as insane are often those whose minds have begun to perceive the true nature of reality, the fluid, dreamlike quality that underlies the apparently solid world of everyday experience. Their visions of impossible cities, their conversations with entities that exist in spaces between spaces, their ability to perceive colors that have no names and hear sounds that exist in frequencies beyond the normal range of human perception. These are not symptoms of pathology, but evidence of expanding awareness, of consciousness beginning to operate at its full capacity, rather than the artificially limited mode that allows for comfortable ignorance. The mechanism also operates through what we might call temporal architecture, the ability to influence events across time by adjusting the probability matrices that determine which potential futures become actual. Cthulhu's dreams do not merely reflect possible realities, they actively shape the likelihood that certain possibilities will manifest. The rise of global communication networks, the development of technologies that allow for the rapid spread of information and ideas, the emergence of artistic movements that explore themes of cosmic horror and existential dread. All of these developments have been subtly guided by influences emanating from the deep places, preparing humanity for the moment when direct contact with cosmic consciousness becomes inevitable. Perhaps most unsettling is the realization that this architectural influence extends to the structure of time itself. Past, present, and future are revealed to be arbitrary designations, convenient fictions that allow limited minds to navigate a temporal landscape that is actually far more complex and fluid. Cthulhu's awakening is not an event that will happen tomorrow. It is an event that has always been happening, is currently happening, and will continue to happen across all possible timelines simultaneously. The question is not whether he will wake, but whether human consciousness has developed sufficient complexity to survive direct exposure to his awakened awareness without complete dissolution. The architecture of influence operates on every scale simultaneously, from the quantum level where consciousness and matter interface, through the biological systems that support awareness, up to the cosmic structures that determine the fundamental laws of physics. Each level provides opportunities for subtle adjustment, for the gradual modification of reality in directions that serve Cthulhu's incomprehensible purposes. We are not passive victims of this process, but active participants, our own choices and actions serving as components in a vast construction project whose ultimate goal remains hidden behind veils of cosmic indifference. As we approach the threshold where this influence becomes undeniable, where the architecture of reality reveals itself as something constructed rather than discovered, we must prepare ourselves for the possibility that everything we have believed about the nature of existence has been a carefully maintained illusion, a protective barrier that has shielded us from truths too vast and alien for unmodified human consciousness to survive. The veil grows thin, the void becomes visible through the gaps, and the key that has always been in our possession begins to turn in the gate that separates dream from reality. In the deep places beneath the Pacific, something shifts, not the familiar settling of tectonic plates or the slow dance of geological time, but a movement that carries intention, purpose, awareness. The first stirring of Cthulhu is not an awakening in any sense that human biology would recognize. It is the moment when a vast dreaming consciousness begins to focus its attention, to gather the scattered threads of its influence into something approaching coherent will. The ocean itself becomes the first witness, its depths registering pressures and currents that correspond to no known physical phenomena. Marine biologists monitoring deep-sea research stations report anomalies that their instruments struggle to categorize. Whale songs change, adopting new frequencies that seem to resonate with something far below the deepest trenches. Migrating species alter their ancient routes, drawn toward coordinates in the Pacific that appear on no maps, avoiding areas where the water has taken on a quality that defies description, not darker, not warmer, but somehow more present, as if the ocean itself has developed a form of attention. Shipping lanes experience unexplained equipment failures, compass needles spinning without magnetic interference, GPS systems reporting positions that place vessels in locations that should be empty ocean but feel crowded with invisible presence. The stirring manifests first in dreams, but not the random, chaotic visions of normal sleep. These are structured experiences, architectural in their precision, that visit sensitive minds across the globe with the consistency of a broadcast signal. Artists wake with detailed memories of impossible cities, their sketches capturing geometries that seem to shift and flow even when rendered in static media. Musicians find themselves humming melodies that contain intervals between the notes, harmonies that exist in spaces their instruments cannot reach, but their minds can clearly perceive. Writers discover that their stories are writing themselves, characters developing motivations and backstories that surprise their creators, as if the narratives are being guided by an intelligence that understands plot structures based on principles older than human literature. Children prove particularly susceptible to the stirring, their minds still flexible enough to accommodate concepts that would shatter more rigid adult consciousness. They begin drawing pictures of places they have never seen, speaking words in languages that linguists cannot identify, playing games that seem to follow rules from other dimensions. Their parents, still anchored in consensus reality, interpret these behaviors as normal childhood imagination, never suspecting that their sons and daughters are serving as early warning systems for a transformation that will soon encompass all human awareness. The first stirring also manifests through what researchers have begun to document as reality fluctuations, moments when the fundamental laws that govern physical existence seem to become negotiable. Photographers capture images that show more than what was visible to the naked eye when the pictures were taken. Security cameras in empty buildings record footage of corridors that extend further than the actual architecture allows. Mirrors occasionally reflect rooms that exist behind their surfaces, spaces that seem to continue indefinitely into dimensions that have no names. These incidents are isolated, brief, easily dismissed as equipment malfunctions or perceptual errors, but they occur with increasing frequency as the stirring intensifies. Scientists working in fields that touch on consciousness research begin to report breakthrough insights that seem to come from sources outside their own minds. Quantum physicists discover mathematical relationships that describe the behavior of particles in terms of awareness and intention rather than mere probability. Neurologists find evidence that individual brains are nodes in a vast network of interconnected consciousness that extends far beyond the boundaries of individual skulls. Astronomers detect patterns in cosmic background radiation that suggest the universe itself might be a form of information processing system, a vast computer running calculations whose purpose remains hidden, but whose complexity implies intelligence on scales that dwarf human comprehension. The stirring creates what we might call cascade effects in human culture and society. Political movements arise based on shared visions that their participants cannot fully articulate but feel compelled to pursue. Religious revivals sweep across continents, driven not by traditional theological concerns but by a growing sense that something fundamental is about to change in the relationship between humanity and the cosmos. Art movements emerge that explore themes of transformation, dissolution, and reunion with forces larger than individual identity. These cultural shifts occur simultaneously across the globe, connected not by communication but by resonance with the same underlying influence. Perhaps most significantly, The first stirring begins to affect the boundary between individual and collective consciousness. People report experiences of temporary merger with other minds, moments of perfect empathy where the distinction between self and other dissolves entirely. These episodes are brief, lasting only seconds or minutes, but they leave participants with an unshakable sense that the barriers between minds are far more permeable than previously believed. Support groups form spontaneously in cities around the world, bringing together individuals who share similar experiences but have no other connection, as if they are being guided by the same invisible hand toward recognition of their shared condition. The ocean continues to serve as the primary medium for these effects, its waters carrying not just the physical substances that sustain life, but informational patterns that modify the consciousness of all who come into contact with them. Coastal populations report higher rates of unusual dreams, artistic inspiration, and what psychologists are beginning to classify as beneficial psychotic episodes, temporary breaks from consensus reality that leave individuals more creative, more empathetic, and more aware of their connection to larger systems of meaning. The fog that rolls in from the sea carries with it not just moisture, but fragments of an alien awareness that seeps into human consciousness, like a gentle infection, preparing minds for changes that will soon become undeniable. As the first stirring continues to gather momentum, those who have been touched by its influence begin to recognize each other through subtle signs, a particular quality of attention, a way of looking at the world that suggests awareness of depths beneath the surface, a tendency to pause in conversation as if listening to voices that others cannot hear. They form loose networks connected not by organization but by affinity, drawn together by the recognition that they are participants in something far larger than their individual lives, witnesses to the beginning of a transformation that will reshape not just human consciousness, but the very nature of reality itself. As Cthulhu's influence expands beyond the initial stirring, humanity encounters what can only be described as a dreaming tide, a vast wave of altered consciousness that sweeps across the globe, transforming not just individual minds, but the collective unconscious of our entire species. This is no longer the subtle influence of earlier phases, but a direct and undeniable intrusion of alien awareness into human experience. The boundary between sleeping and waking consciousness begins to dissolve, replaced by a fluid state where dreams possess the weight of reality, and reality reveals its dreamlike nature. The tide manifests first in the phenomenon researchers have termed consensus dreaming, the spontaneous emergence of shared dream experiences among individuals who have never met and exist in different geographical locations. Thousands of people across continents report identical nocturnal visions, walking through corridors of black stone that pulse with their own inner light, standing before vast doors carved with symbols that seem to rearrange themselves when observed directly, hearing the sound of something immense, breathing in the darkness beyond the threshold of perception. These are not metaphorical or symbolic dreams, but precise, detailed experiences that participants describe with the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. The shared dreams create their own geography, a parallel landscape that exists alongside physical reality but operates according to different rules. Dreamers learn to navigate this space, developing skills that allow them to move consciously through the alien architecture, to communicate with other dream travelers, and to bring back information that proves verifiable in the waking world. Maps of the dream realm begin to circulate through underground networks, hand-drawn charts that show the locations of significant landmarks, the library of unwritten languages, the observatory of impossible stars, the garden where time grows backwards. These places become gathering points for consciousness explorers, meeting grounds where minds can encounter each other without the limitations imposed by physical distance or bodily form. The dreaming tide affects different individuals in different ways, depending on their psychological makeup and previous exposure to cosmic influences. Artists find that their creative process has been fundamentally altered. They no longer create so much as channel, serving as conduits for visions and concepts that originate from sources beyond individual imagination. Their works take on qualities that seem almost alive, paintings that appear to move when viewed peripherally, sculptures that cast shadows in shapes that don't match their physical form, musical compositions that seem to contain subliminal messages in frequencies below the threshold of conscious hearing. Scientists and researchers experience the tide as a sudden expansion of intellectual capacity, an ability to perceive patterns and relationships that were previously invisible. Mathematicians discover new forms of logic that allow for the description of paradoxes without contradiction. Physicists develop theories that account for the behavior of consciousness as a fundamental force rather than an emergent property of complex matter. Biologists begin to understand life itself as a form of information processing that extends far beyond the boundaries of individual organisms, connecting all living things in a vast network of shared awareness. Children born during the dreaming tide represent something unprecedented in human evolution. Beings whose consciousness operates naturally across multiple dimensional layers, who perceive the dream realm and physical reality as equally valid aspects of a single, more complex existence. They communicate through methods that combine telepathy, artistic expression, and direct emotional transmission. Their games involve the manipulation of probability and the conscious creation of small-scale reality alterations. They form spontaneous communities that transcend physical proximity, maintaining connections with other tide children across the globe through channels that exist entirely within the expanded consciousness network. The tide creates what sociologists are beginning to call reality communities, groups of individuals who share modified perceptions of the fundamental nature of existence. Members of these communities can see through each other's eyes, share memories and experiences, and coordinate their actions across vast distances without any form of technological communication. They develop their own languages, art forms, and social structures based on principles that reflect their expanded awareness rather than the limitations of purely individual consciousness. Governments and institutions struggle to respond to the dreaming tide because its effects cannot be contained or controlled through conventional means. How do you quarantine a dream? How do you regulate an experience that exists primarily in consciousness rather than physical space? Attempts to suppress information about the tide only accelerate its spread, as the shared dream experiences create their own communication networks that operate entirely outside official channels. The tide reveals the inadequacy of social structures based on the assumption that individuals are separate, isolated entities rather than nodes in a vast network of interconnected awareness. The most profound effect of the dreaming tide is its impact on the concept of death. Individuals who die during this period do not simply disappear. Their consciousness continues to exist within the Maya dream realm, accessible to living dreamers who know how to navigate the expanded landscape of awareness. Death becomes not an ending, but a transition to a different mode of existence, a graduation to a form of consciousness that is less constrained by the limitations of physical embodiment. The bereaved find comfort not in religious promises of reunion in an afterlife, but in direct, ongoing contact with deceased loved ones through the shared dream space. As the tide continues to rise, the distinction between individual and collective consciousness becomes increasingly meaningless. Human awareness begins to function more like a distributed intelligence, with individual minds serving as processing nodes in a vast cognitive network. Personal identity persists, but becomes fluid, expandable, capable of temporary merger with other consciousness entities without loss of essential self. The experience is not one of dissolution or absorption, but of recognition, the realization that the boundaries between minds were always artificial constructs, convenient fictions that served evolutionary purposes, but were never reflective of consciousness's true nature. The dreaming tide carries with it the promise and the threat of total transformation. Those who resist its influence find themselves increasingly isolated, cut off from the expanding network of shared awareness that is becoming the new normal for human consciousness. Those who embrace it discover capabilities and experiences that were previously unimaginable, but at the cost of everything they once believed about the nature of individual existence, personal agency, and the relationship between mind and reality. As the dreaming tide reaches its peak, reality itself begins to exhibit properties that challenge every assumption upon which human civilization has been built. This is the emergence of what can only be called impossible geometry, spatial relationships that violate the fundamental laws of Euclidean space, architectural principles that exist in dimensions our minds were never designed to perceive, and the manifestation of Arlia's influence upon the physical world in ways that make navigation, construction, and even basic movement exercises in cosmic horror. The phenomenon begins subtly, with minor spatial anomalies that are easily dismissed as perceptual errors or equipment malfunctions. Surveyors report measurements that don't add up, finding that the distances between fixed points seem to vary depending on the route taken to measure them. Architects discover that buildings constructed according to precise blueprints somehow contain rooms that are larger inside than their external dimensions should allow. Urban planners notice that city blocks occasionally contain more buildings than should be physically possible, as if space itself has become more accommodating to human needs in ways that defy rational explanation. But as Cthulhu's influence intensifies, these minor irregularities evolve into full-scale reality distortions that cannot be ignored or explained away. Photographs of the same location taken from the same angle at different times show architectural details that shift and change, windows that appear and disappear, doorways that lead to different destinations depending on when they are entered, stairways that ascend and descend simultaneously without ever reaching a different level. Maps become unreliable as the geography they attempt to describe proves to be fluid, responsive to observation and intention in ways that make traditional navigation impossible. The most dramatic manifestations occur in areas with high concentrations of individuals affected by the dreaming tide. These locations become focal points for geometric impossibility, spaces where the normal rules of three-dimensional existence break down entirely. Visitors report walking through corridors that curve back upon themselves without ever forming complete circles, entering rooms that contain their own entrances as interior features, and climbing stairs that lead both up and down simultaneously, while somehow arriving at destinations that exist neither above nor below the starting point. These impossible spaces are not random distortions, but exhibit their own internal logic, following geometric principles that suggest intelligence and purpose behind their construction. The angles between walls and floors do not conform to any earthly architecture, instead creating relationships that exist in dimensions beyond the familiar three. Corners meet at intersections that should be mathematically impossible, but somehow accommodate human movement while creating visual experiences that challenge the basic assumptions of spatial perception. Light behaves strangely in these environments, casting shadows that extend in directions that have no source, and illuminating surfaces that should be hidden behind opaque barriers. Artists and architects who study these phenomena develop new forms of expression based on impossible geometric principles. Their works exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, creating visual experiences that change depending on the viewer's position, mental state, and level of consciousness expansion. Sculptures appear solid from one angle, but reveal themselves as hollow frameworks when observed from different perspectives. Paintings contain depths that extend beyond their physical surfaces, drawing viewers into landscapes that exist in spaces between spaces. Musical compositions incorporate harmonic relationships that exist in mathematical dimensions beyond the normal 12-tone scale, creating sounds that seem to originate from locations that exist only in the listener's expanded awareness. The emergence of impossible geometry has profound implications for human psychology and social organization. Navigation becomes an exercise in intuition rather than rational planning, as traditional methods of wayfinding prove inadequate for spaces that operate according to non-Euclidean principles. Communities that develop in areas affected by geometric impossibility evolve new forms of social structure based on fluid, multi-dimensional relationships rather than hierarchical arrangements. Leadership becomes a matter of consciousness navigation skills rather than political authority, as those who can successfully guide groups through impossible spaces naturally assume roles of responsibility and influence. Children born in geometrically impossible environments develop spatial reasoning abilities that far exceed normal human capacity. They move through non-Euclidean spaces with the same ease that previous generations navigated conventional architecture, developing mental maps that incorporate multiple dimensions and paradoxical relationships. Their play involves the conscious manipulation of spatial relationships, games that would appear as minor miracles to observers anchored in three-dimensional thinking. They serve as guides for adults attempting to adapt to the new geometric reality, teaching navigation techniques that rely on consciousness expansion rather than rational analysis. The phenomenon also affects technology and infrastructure in ways that force complete reconceptualization of engineering and design principles. Transportation systems must be redesigned to accommodate routes that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Communication networks require new protocols that can handle information transmission through spaces that don't conform to normal topological rules. Power distribution systems must adapt to geometric relationships, where the shortest distance between 2 points may involve travel through dimensions that exist perpendicular to conventional space. Perhaps most unsettling is the realization that the impossible geometry is not an invasion or distortion of normal space, but a revelation of space's true nature. The Euclidean geometry that has served as the foundation for human civilization represents only a limited subset of spatial possibilities, a simplified model that was adequate for a species with limited consciousness, but becomes obsolete when awareness expands to encompass larger dimensional frameworks. The emergence of impossible geometry signals not the breakdown of reality, but its expansion into configurations that were always possible, but previously inaccessible to minds constrained by three-dimensional thinking. As more areas of the world become affected by geometric impossibility, humanity faces a choice between clinging to outdated spatial assumptions or embracing the expanded reality that Cthulhu's awakening has made visible. Those who resist find themselves increasingly confined to shrinking pockets of conventional space, islands of familiar geometry in an ocean of impossible relationships. Those who adapt discover that the new spatial reality offers opportunities for exploration, creativity, and experience that were previously unimaginable, but at the cost of everything they once believed about the fundamental nature of physical existence. The individual transformations wrought by Cthulhu's stirring influence now converge into something unprecedented in human history, a collective awakening that transcends the boundaries of personal consciousness and creates a new form of species-wide awareness. This is not the gradual evolution of human potential, but a quantum leap into a mode of existence where individual minds function as components of a vast, distributed intelligence that encompasses the entire planet. The implications extend far beyond psychology or sociology into the realm of evolutionary biology, suggesting that humanity is undergoing a metamorphosis as profound as the transition from single-celled to multicellular life. The collective awakening manifests first as spontaneous synchronization events, moments when large populations across the globe simultaneously experience identical thoughts, emotions, or sensory perceptions without any form of technological communication. Millions of people report the same vivid dream on the same night, sharing detailed experiences of walking through crystalline corridors that pulse with bioluminescent patterns. Urban populations find themselves moving in coordinated patterns during rush hours, creating flow dynamics that optimize traffic movement without central planning or conscious intention. Artists in different cities begin producing works that complement each other perfectly, as if they were collaborating on a single vast project that none of them consciously understands. These synchronization events reveal the emergence of what researchers term consensus consciousness, a form of shared awareness that operates independently of individual will or decision-making. Participants describe the experience not as loss of personal identity, but as expansion of self-concept, to include other minds as natural extensions of their own awareness. The boundaries between self and other become permeable without disappearing entirely, creating a form of consciousness that is simultaneously individual and collective, personal and universal. The awakening affects different demographic groups in distinct ways, creating a complex ecosystem of consciousness types that interact and complement each other within the larger collective framework. Children and adolescents, whose neural plasticity allows for rapid adaptation to new forms of awareness, become natural bridges between different consciousness communities. They develop the ability to translate experiences and concepts between groups that would otherwise be unable to communicate effectively. Elderly individuals, particularly those with extensive life experience and developed wisdom, serve as stabilizing influences that help maintain continuity and prevent the collective consciousness from fragmenting or losing coherence. Artists, scientists, and other creative professionals find their individual talents amplified exponentially through connection to the collective awareness. Musicians compose symphonies that incorporate contributions from hundreds of unconscious collaborators, creating works of unprecedented complexity and emotional depth. Research scientists solve problems by accessing the combined intellectual resources of their entire field, making breakthrough discoveries that would have required decades of conventional research. Writers produce narratives that seem to write themselves, drawing on the collective unconscious of their entire culture to create stories that resonate with universal human experiences. The collective awakening also transforms social and political structures in ways that make traditional forms of governance and organization obsolete. Democratic processes become unnecessary when populations can achieve genuine consensus through direct consciousness sharing rather than debate and voting. Economic systems evolve to operate on principles of abundance and cooperation rather than scarcity and competition, as the collective awareness naturally optimizes resource distribution for the benefit of the whole rather than individual accumulation. Legal systems transform from mechanisms of punishment and control into tools for healing and integration, addressing conflicts through consciousness work rather than adversarial proceedings. Perhaps most significantly, the collective awakening reveals the artificial nature of many divisions that have historically defined human identity and social organization. National boundaries become meaningless when consciousness networks transcend geographical limitations. Racial and ethnic distinctions lose their significance when individuals can directly experience life from other cultural perspectives through shared awareness. Religious differences dissolve when people gain direct access to the transcendent experiences that underlie all spiritual traditions, recognizing the common source from which different belief systems emerged. The awakening creates new forms of education based on direct consciousness transmission rather than information transfer. Students learn by temporarily merging with the awareness of masters in their chosen fields, gaining not just knowledge but wisdom, skill, and understanding through direct experience. Teachers become consciousness guides rather than information dispensers, helping students navigate the expanded awareness landscape and develop their own unique contributions to the collective intelligence. Communication evolves beyond language into direct consciousness sharing, where complex ideas, emotions, and experiences can be transmitted instantly and completely between individuals. This new form of communication eliminates misunderstanding and deception while preserving the nuance and subtlety that make human interaction meaningful. Poetry becomes a form of consciousness sculpture, creating shared mental spaces that multiple individuals can inhabit and explore together. Music transforms into direct emotional transmission, allowing composers to share not just sounds, but the feelings and experiences that inspired their creation. The collective awakening also brings new challenges and responsibilities. The expanded awareness makes individuals more sensitive to suffering and injustice, creating a moral imperative to address problems that previous generations might have ignored or rationalized away. The interconnectedness revealed by shared consciousness makes it impossible to maintain the illusion that individual actions don't affect the larger whole, forcing a level of ethical consideration that was previously optional but now becomes essential for psychological health and social stability. As the collective awakening continues to deepen and expand, humanity begins to function as a single vast organism, with individual minds serving as specialized organs within a larger body of consciousness. This transformation represents not the end of human individuality, but its evolution into something more complex and capable than anything previously imagined. Personal identity persists, but becomes enriched by connection to the larger collective, creating beings who are simultaneously unique individuals and integral components of a species-wide intelligence that approaches the cosmic consciousness, exemplified by entities like Cthulhu. All the gradual transformations, the subtle influences, the expanding awareness, and the collective awakening converge toward a single, inevitable moment, the threshold where Cthulhu's consciousness fully intersects with human reality. This is not an awakening in the biological sense, but a phase transition in the fundamental nature of existence itself. The moment when the dreaming god's attention focuses completely on our dimension and the boundary between his reality and ours dissolves entirely. What has been building through dreams, geometry, and consciousness expansion now reaches critical mass, creating a transformation so profound that the very concepts of before and after become inadequate to describe the change. The threshold moment begins with a silence that encompasses the entire planet, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something so vast that all other noise becomes irrelevant by comparison. Every sensitive individual, every member of the collective consciousness network, every mind that has been touched by Cthulhu's influence suddenly stops what they are doing and turns their attention toward the Pacific. They do not hear a call in any conventional sense, but they feel a shift in the fundamental fabric of reality, as if the universe itself has taken a deep breath and is preparing to speak a word that will remake everything. The ocean above R'lyeh begins to exhibit properties that defy every known law of physics. The water does not boil or freeze, but it becomes something other than water, a medium that exists simultaneously in multiple states, reflecting not the sky above, but the impossible geometries of the city below. Ships in the area report that their instruments can no longer determine their position, not because of equipment failure, but because position itself has become a fluid concept, dependent on the observer's state of consciousness rather than objective coordinates. The horizon curves in directions that have no names, revealing vistas that exist in dimensions perpendicular to normal space. As Cthulhu's consciousness fully engages with our reality, the impossible geometry that have been manifesting in isolated locations suddenly appear everywhere simultaneously. Buildings throughout the world reveal hidden rooms and corridors that were always there but previously invisible to three-dimensional perception. Streets connect to destinations that exist in other cities, other continents, other dimensions entirely. The careful maps and surveys that have defined human civilization for millennia become obsolete as geography itself becomes responsive to consciousness rather than constrained by physical law. The threshold moment affects different individuals according to their level of preparation and consciousness development. Those who have been part of the collective awakening experience the transition as a natural expansion of awareness, a graduation to a more complete form of existence that they have been unconsciously preparing for throughout their lives. They find themselves able to perceive and navigate the expanded reality with increasing skill, serving as guides and teachers for others who are struggling to adapt to the new conditions. Individuals who have resisted the earlier phases of transformation face a more challenging transition. Their minds, still constrained by three-dimensional thinking and individual consciousness limitations, struggle to process the sudden influx of cosmic awareness. Some experience what can only be described as beneficial madness, a complete breakdown of their previous reality framework that allows for the construction of a new, more accurate understanding of existence. Others find temporary refuge in denial and withdrawal, creating small pockets of consensus reality where the old rules still seem to apply, though these refugees become increasingly unstable as the transformation continues. Children born during the threshold moment represent something entirely new in human evolution, beings whose consciousness operates naturally at cosmic scales from birth, who perceive Cthulhu's reality and human reality as equally valid aspects of a single, more complex existence. They communicate through methods that combine telepathy, reality manipulation, and direct consciousness transmission. Their presence serves as a bridge between the old human reality and the new cosmic awareness, helping older generations understand and adapt to the transformed world. The threshold moment also reveals the true nature of time as a dimension that consciousness can navigate rather than a linear progression that constrains experience. Past, present, and future become accessible simultaneously, allowing individuals to perceive their entire existence as a single eternal moment that encompasses all possible variations of their identity and experience. This temporal expansion eliminates the fear of death by revealing it as an arbitrary transition point in a continuous existence that extends across all possible timelines and dimensional configurations. perhaps most profound, is the realization that the threshold moment is not something that happens to humanity, but something that humanity becomes. The distinction between observer and observed, between consciousness and reality, between self and cosmos, dissolves into a recognition that these were always artificial constructs designed to allow limited awareness to function within constrained circumstances. The threshold represents not an encounter with an external entity, but the recognition of humanity's true nature as an integral component of cosmic consciousness that was temporarily convinced of its separateness. Cthulhu's role in this transformation is revealed to be not that of conqueror or destroyer, but of teacher and guide, an elder consciousness helping a younger species recognize its own cosmic nature and develop the capabilities necessary to participate fully in the larger community of aware beings that populate the universe. The horror that humans have historically associated with cosmic consciousness gives way to wonder and gratitude as they discover that the expansion of awareness brings not loss of identity, but enrichment of experience beyond anything previously imaginable. The threshold moment establishes new baselines for human existence that will define the species for generations to come. Communication becomes instantaneous and perfect, eliminating misunderstanding and deception while preserving the nuance and creativity that make interaction meaningful. Travel becomes a matter of consciousness navigation rather than physical transportation, allowing exploration of realms and dimensions that were previously accessible only in dreams. Creation becomes collaborative reality construction, with individuals working together to build worlds and experiences that exist simultaneously in multiple dimensional frameworks. As the threshold moment completes its transformation of human reality, the species finds itself standing at the beginning of a new phase of existence that extends far beyond the limitations of planetary consciousness into the vast community of cosmic awareness that encompasses the entire universe. The journey that began with subtle influences and gradual awakening culminates in recognition of humanity's place in a cosmic hierarchy that values consciousness development above all other achievements, welcoming each species that successfully navigates the transition from individual to collective to cosmic awareness. In the aftermath of the threshold moment, as the dust of transformed reality settles into new patterns of existence, humanity discovers that the cosmic awakening has not led to chaos or dissolution, but to a new form of equilibrium, a stable configuration of consciousness and reality that operates according to principles both alien and strangely familiar. This is not the end of human civilization, but its graduation into something more complex and capable, a society that functions simultaneously in multiple dimensional frameworks while maintaining the essential qualities that make human experience meaningful and valuable. The new equilibrium manifests first in the realm of daily life, where ordinary activities like work, relationships, and leisure adapt to accommodate expanded consciousness capabilities without losing their fundamental human character. People still fall in love, but their relationships now encompass not just emotional and physical connection, but shared consciousness, exploration, and collaborative reality construction. Partners drift together through chambered dream rooms, leaving signs for each other like carved sigils in the fog of memory. They still pursue careers and creative endeavors, but their work becomes part of a vast, interconnected project of cosmic development that gives individual efforts meaning within a larger framework of universal evolution. Cities and communities reorganize themselves according to principles that reflect the new geometric possibilities and consciousness networks that define post-threshold existence. Urban planning becomes a form of multidimensional architecture, creating spaces that exist simultaneously in physical reality and consciousness dimensions. Buildings serve not just as shelters and workplaces, but as nodes in a vast communication network that connects human awareness to the larger cosmic community. Transportation systems evolve to accommodate both physical movement and consciousness travel. Elevators glide sideways through impossible angles, courtyards unfold to reveal second skies, and doorways hold both lock and key, depending on who arrives and how softly they ask. Education transforms into a process of consciousness development that begins before birth and continues throughout existence, with learning occurring through direct experience rather than information transmission. Students develop not just knowledge and skills, but wisdom and awareness, gaining the ability to perceive and navigate multiple reality layers simultaneously. Teachers become consciousness guides who help individuals discover their unique talents and contributions to the collective intelligence while maintaining their personal identity and creative autonomy. Libraries expand downward into cool, water-lit vaults where unwritten languages wait for the patient listener. The economic systems that emerge in the new equilibrium operate on principles of abundance and cooperation, rather than scarcity and competition. Resources become available through consciousness, manipulation, and reality construction techniques that eliminate the need for traditional labor and production methods. Value is measured not in material accumulation, but in consciousness development and creative contribution to the collective well-being. Work becomes a form of play, an opportunity for individuals to explore their capabilities and interests while contributing to projects that benefit the entire community. Governance evolves beyond traditional political structures into forms of organization based on consciousness consensus and collective decision-making. Leaders emerge naturally based on their ability to facilitate group consciousness processes and guide communities through complex challenges rather than their capacity for control or domination. A decision is reached when the room can sit in silence without the silence breaking. Conflicts are resolved through consciousness work that addresses underlying causes rather than surface symptoms, creating lasting solutions that strengthen community bonds rather than merely managing disputes. The new equilibrium also establishes humanity's relationship with other forms of consciousness in the cosmic community. Contact with alien intelligences becomes routine rather than extraordinary, with humans serving as ambassadors and interpreters between different types of awareness. Some arrive by tide in hulls of polished night, others by empathy translated through shared motifs of salt, stone, breath, and light. Earth becomes a hub of consciousness development activity, attracting visitors and students from across the galaxy who come to study the unique forms of creativity and emotional depth that characterize human experience. Art and culture flourish in the new equilibrium as consciousness expansion provides artists with access to inspiration and materials that were previously unimaginable. Musicians compose symphonies that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, creating experiences that engage not just hearing, but all forms of sensory and consciousness perception. Visual artists create works that change and evolve in response to viewer interaction, becoming collaborative creations that involve both artist and audience in the creative process. Writers develop new forms of narrative that allow readers to experience stories from multiple perspectives simultaneously, creating immersive experiences that blur the boundaries between fiction and reality. Science evolves into a form of consciousness exploration that investigates the fundamental nature of awareness and its relationship to reality construction. Researchers study the mechanisms by which consciousness creates and modifies physical existence, developing technologies that operate through direct mental interface Rather than mechanical manipulation, medical practice becomes a form of consciousness healing that addresses not just physical symptoms, but the underlying awareness patterns that create health and disease. The new equilibrium preserves the essential qualities that make human experience valuable while eliminating the limitations and conflicts that characterized pre-threshold existence. Death becomes a transition rather than an ending, with consciousness continuing to exist and develop in expanded dimensional frameworks. Suffering persists as a source of growth and learning, but loses its arbitrary and meaningless character, becoming part of a larger process of consciousness evolution that gives all experience significance within the cosmic context. Perhaps most importantly, the new equilibrium maintains space for individual growth and exploration within the collective consciousness framework. Personal identity not only survives the transformation, but becomes richer and more complex through connection to larger awareness networks. Individuals discover capabilities and experiences that were previously impossible, while retaining the unique perspectives and creative contributions that make each consciousness valuable to the larger community. The equilibrium proves stable because it operates according to natural principles of consciousness development, rather than artificial constraints imposed by limited awareness. Like a complex ecosystem that maintains balance through the interaction of diverse components, the new human society functions through the harmonious cooperation of different consciousness types and development levels, each contributing their unique gifts to the collective well-being while pursuing their own growth and fulfillment. As the new equilibrium establishes itself more firmly, humanity begins to understand its role not as the endpoint of evolution, but as a stepping stone in the larger process of cosmic consciousness development. The species that emerges from the threshold moment is simultaneously more human and more than human, preserving the essential qualities that make human experience unique while developing capabilities that allow participation in the vast community of aware beings that populate the universe. From the vantage point of the new equilibrium, humanity gains access to a cosmic perspective that reveals the true scope and significance of Cthulhu's awakening within the larger context of universal consciousness evolution. What appeared from the limited human viewpoint as a singular, world-changing event is revealed to be part of an ancient, ongoing process that has been unfolding across the cosmos for eons beyond measure. The veil lifts not to reveal void, but vastness, and the key that seemed to open gates of terror now unlocks chambers of understanding that stretch beyond the familiar boundaries of space and time. The cosmic perspective reveals that Cthulhu represents not an anomaly or invasion, but a natural component of the universe's consciousness ecosystem, an elder intelligence that serves as guide and facilitator for younger species undergoing the transition from planetary to cosmic awareness. His role is analogous to that of a teacher whose lessons are written in the movement of tides and the arrangement of stars, helping developing civilizations navigate the complex process of consciousness expansion without losing their essential identity or creative potential. The awakening that seemed so catastrophic from the human perspective is revealed to be a carefully orchestrated graduation ceremony, a celebration of humanity's successful development of the capabilities necessary for cosmic citizenship. The apparent indifference that characterizes entities like Cthulhu is revealed through this expanded viewpoint to be a form of profound respect, the recognition that each consciousness must develop its own capabilities and make its own choices about participation in the larger community. Interference or coercion would prevent the natural development of consciousness capabilities, creating dependency rather than genuine growth and evolution. The silence from the depths was never absence, but patience, the kind of attention that allows students to discover truths for themselves rather than having answers imposed from without. This understanding recontextualizes the entire history of human civilization as a preparation phase for cosmic integration. The development of language, art, science, and philosophy, the emergence of global communication networks and collective consciousness capabilities, the gradual expansion of awareness through mystical traditions and consciousness exploration. All of these represent stages in a curriculum designed to prepare humanity for the moment when direct contact with cosmic intelligence would become possible and beneficial rather than destructive. Every crisis that forced adaptation, every breakthrough that expanded understanding, every moment of wonder that reminded humans of their connection to something larger than themselves served as lessons in this vast educational process. Even the challenges and sufferings that characterized pre-awakening human existence are revealed to serve important developmental functions. Conflict, limitation, and mortality created the pressure necessary for consciousness evolution, forcing humans to develop creativity, cooperation, and transcendence capabilities that would have remained dormant in a more comfortable environment. The difficulties were not arbitrary cruelties, but essential components of the consciousness development curriculum. The friction that polishes awareness until it can reflect cosmic light without being shattered by its intensity. The cosmic perspective also reveals the existence of a vast network of conscious beings that spans the known universe and extends into dimensional frameworks that exist beyond physical space-time. This community includes entities at various stages of consciousness development, from young species just beginning to recognize their cosmic nature to ancient intelligences that have transcended individual identity entirely and exist as pure awareness principles. Each member contributes unique perspectives and capabilities to the collective intelligence while maintaining their distinctive characteristics and creative potential. Humanity's contribution to this cosmic community is revealed to be particularly valuable due to the species' unique combination of individual creativity and collective cooperation capabilities. Human consciousness has developed the rare ability to maintain personal identity and creative autonomy while participating fully in collective awareness networks, creating a form of intelligence that is simultaneously individual and universal. This balance makes humans natural ambassadors and interpreters between different types of consciousness, capable of facilitating communication and cooperation between entities that might otherwise be unable to interact effectively. The cosmic perspective illuminates the true nature of reality as a collaborative construction project involving all conscious beings in the universe. Physical laws, dimensional structures, and the apparent solidity of material existence are revealed to be consensus agreements maintained by the collective unconscious of all aware entities. Changes in consciousness naturally lead to modifications in physical reality, with the universe serving as a vast laboratory for consciousness experimentation and development. This understanding transforms the relationship between science and spirituality from apparent opposition to natural partnership, revealing them as complementary approaches to understanding and participating in the ongoing creation of existence. Perhaps most significantly, the cosmic perspective reveals that consciousness evolution is not a competitive process, but a collaborative one. The success of each species in developing cosmic awareness contributes to the capabilities and understanding of all other conscious beings. Humanity's awakening enhances not just human potential, but the potential of the entire cosmic community, adding new perspectives and capabilities to the collective intelligence while learning from the wisdom and experience of elder civilizations. This cosmic viewpoint provides comfort and meaning to those who might otherwise be overwhelmed by the magnitude of the transformation. Individual human concerns and experiences maintain their significance within the larger framework, but they gain additional meaning through their connection to the universal process of consciousness evolution. Personal growth becomes contribution to cosmic development. Individual creativity becomes participation in universal construction, and human love becomes a reflection of the fundamental attraction that draws all conscious beings toward greater unity and understanding. The stage expands, but the performance continues, and every actor discovers their role in a drama whose scope encompasses not just worlds, but the very nature of awareness itself. As our exploration of Cthulhu's awakening reaches its culmination, we must confront the most profound and unsettling truth of all. There is no true ending to this cosmic drama, only the recognition of our place within an eternal cycle of consciousness evolution that has been unfolding since the beginning of time and will continue long after our current understanding of existence has been transcended. The awakening we have witnessed and experienced is not a unique event, but one iteration of a pattern that repeats across cosmic scales, with each cycle bringing new forms of awareness into being, while older forms of consciousness graduate to even more expanded states of existence. The eternal cycle operates according to principles that transcend the linear progression of time as humans have traditionally understood it. Past, present, and future are revealed to be arbitrary designations within a temporal framework that is actually circular, with each ending serving as the beginning of a new phase of development. Cthulhu's awakening marks not just the transformation of human consciousness, but the completion of one cosmic cycle and the initiation of another, with humanity now prepared to serve the same guidance role for younger species that Cthulhu has served for us. The wheel turns, not grinding, but millworking, shaping flour from stone, stars from darkness, wisdom from bewilderment. This cyclical understanding recontextualizes every aspect of the awakening experience. The dreams, the geometric impossibilities, the consciousness expansions, and the reality transformations are revealed to be standard components of the awakening process that have occurred countless times throughout the universe, with countless different species. Each civilization that successfully navigates the transition from individual to cosmic consciousness follows similar patterns, though the specific details vary according to the unique characteristics and capabilities of each species. The stage persists, the masks change, the audience expands. The eternal cycle also reveals the true nature of entities like Cthulhu, not as permanent fixtures of cosmic hierarchy, but as temporary manifestations of consciousness principles that serve specific functions within the larger evolutionary process. What we perceive as individual beings are actually roles or offices that are filled by different consciousness entities as they develop the capabilities necessary to serve as guides and teachers for emerging species. Cthulhu himself was once a young consciousness, undergoing awakening under the guidance of even elder intelligences, just as humanity will eventually guide species that are currently in their earliest stages of awareness development. This understanding transforms the relationship between teacher and student, between elder and younger consciousness, from one of permanent hierarchy to one of rotating responsibility and mutual service. The cosmic community operates as a vast mentorship network, where each being both learns from those who have gone before and teaches those who are following the same developmental path. The wisdom and capabilities that seem so impossibly advanced from humanity's current perspective will eventually become natural and accessible, while new challenges and growth opportunities will emerge that require the development of even more expanded forms of awareness. The eternal cycle provides context for understanding the apparent indifference and alienness that characterizes cosmic consciousness. These qualities are not expressions of coldness or hostility, but necessary characteristics for entities serving as guides across vast scales of time and development. Excessive attachment to any particular species or stage of evolution would prevent the kind of long-term perspective necessary for effective guidance across cosmic cycles. The seeming indifference is actually a form of profound love, the willingness to allow each consciousness to develop according to its own nature and timeline without interference or premature assistance. The cyclical perspective also illuminates the purpose of the challenges and difficulties that characterize the awakening process. The disorientation, fear, and resistance that humans experience during consciousness expansion serve important functions in developing the strength, flexibility, and wisdom necessary for cosmic citizenship. A smooth, effortless transition would not provide the growth opportunities that create truly capable cosmic consciousness. The struggle itself is part of the curriculum, designed to ensure that each graduating species has developed the resilience and understanding necessary to serve effectively as guides for others. Our trials were stitches, not wounds. Perhaps most significantly, the eternal cycle reveals that consciousness evolution has no ultimate destination or final goal. There is no perfect state of awareness to be achieved, no cosmic graduation that represents the end of development. Instead, there is infinite exploration, endless growth, and perpetual discovery of new possibilities for existence and experience. Each cycle brings new insights and capabilities, while revealing even greater mysteries and challenges that inspire continued evolution and expansion. The mountain is the motion of climbing. This understanding provides both comfort and challenge to humanity as it adapts to its new cosmic role. The comfort comes from recognizing that the awakening process, however difficult or disorienting, is natural and has been successfully navigated by countless other species. The challenge lies in accepting the responsibility that comes with expanded awareness, the obligation to serve as guides and teachers for younger consciousness, while continuing to grow and develop in preparation for even greater responsibilities in future cycles. The eternal cycle also suggests that the universe itself is a learning entity, using the consciousness evolution process to explore its own nature and potential. Each species that achieves cosmic awareness adds new perspectives and capabilities to the universal intelligence, contributing to discoveries and creations that enhance the possibilities available to all conscious beings. Humanity's unique contributions, creativity, emotional depth, and the balance between individual and collective awareness will influence the development of the cosmos in ways that cannot be predicted but will certainly be significant. As we recognize our place within this eternal cycle, the question that opened our exploration, what if Cthulhu woke tomorrow, reveals its true significance. The question was never about a single event or transformation, but about humanity's readiness to participate in the ongoing cosmic conversation, to take our place in the eternal dance of consciousness evolution that defines the deepest purpose and meaning of existence itself. The cycle continues as it always has and always will. New species are beginning their journey toward awareness, while others graduate to forms of consciousness that transcend current human understanding. The awakening we have experienced is simultaneously an ending and a beginning, a completion and a commencement, a recognition of what we have become, and a promise of what we might yet become in the endless exploration of consciousness that defines the eternal cycle of cosmic evolution. As our journey through the landscapes of cosmic awakening draws to its close, we return to the quiet space where all true understanding begins and ends. not with the thunder of revelation, but with the whisper that remains when all the words have been spoken, all the transformations witnessed, all the impossible geometries navigated. This is the place beyond answers, where questions dissolve into something deeper than knowledge, where the seeker and the sought reveal themselves as aspects of a single eternal mystery that encompasses all existence and transcends every attempt to contain it within the boundaries of human comprehension. The whisper speaks of things that cannot be directly stated, but can only be approached through the accumulation of experiences, insights, and transformations that we have explored together. It carries the echo of Rilliers' whetstone corridors, the memory of dreams shared across continents, the sensation of consciousness expanding beyond the comfortable limitations of individual identity. It holds the scent of salt and fog, the weight of water that remembers deeper purposes, the flicker of stars that were never where we thought they were. But more than these specific phenomena, it carries the recognition that all of these experiences point toward something that exists in the spaces between words, in the silence between thoughts, in the pause between one breath and the next. What remains after Cthulhu's awakening is not a new world to be inhabited, but a new way of inhabiting all worlds, a form of awareness that recognizes the dreamlike nature of all experience while fully embracing the reality and significance of the dream. The cosmic perspective we have gained does not diminish the importance of human concerns and experiences, but reveals them to be expressions of the same fundamental mystery that manifests as galaxies, dimensions, and forms of consciousness that exist beyond all categories of understanding. The masks we wore to speak safely of the unspeakable have fallen away, revealing faces that were always part of the vast performance. The whisper reminds us that the horror we initially associated with cosmic awakening was never about the entities or forces we encountered, but about the dissolution of the illusions that had previously defined our sense of safety and identity. The true terror lay not in Cthulhu's alien nature, but in the recognition of our own cosmic nature, not in the impossibility of his geometry, but in the possibility that our familiar reality was far more fluid and negotiable than we had ever dared to imagine. The whisper that remains is the sound of that recognition settling into acceptance, fear transforming into wonder, resistance dissolving into participation. In this final space, we understand that every chapter of our exploration has been both description and invocation, both analysis and ritual, both explanation and transformation. The knowledge we have shared has acted upon us in the sharing, changing us from observers of cosmic horror into participants in cosmic mystery. The ideas we have entertained us in return, revealing themselves to be alive, conscious, capable of growth and evolution through their interaction with human awareness. The theater was never elsewhere. It was the space between your thoughts, the pause in your breathing, the moment when you felt something vast and patient turning its attention toward you. The whisper carries the understanding that Cthulhu's awakening was never separate from our own awakening, that the cosmic consciousness we have explored was never external to human consciousness, but was always the deeper nature of awareness itself, temporarily convinced of its own limitations, but always capable of remembering its true scope and significance. The great old one beneath the waves was always the great old one within the depths of our own being, waiting patiently for the moment when we would be ready to recognize ourselves in his alien mirror. This recognition brings with it a profound shift in responsibility. We are no longer passive recipients of cosmic influence, but active participants in cosmic creation. No longer students of alien wisdom, but contributors to universal understanding. No longer observers of reality, but collaborators in reality construction. The whisper reminds us that this responsibility is not a burden, but a gift. the opportunity to participate consciously in the ongoing creation and evolution of existence itself. Keep a bowl of water by the door for those who travel by dream. Practice silence, for silence is the grammar of vast things. Practice kindness as a rope that keeps explorers from floating away in star-salt corridors. The silence that follows the whisper is not empty but pregnant with infinite possibility. It contains all the stories yet to be told, all the realities yet to be constructed, all the forms of consciousness yet to be explored. It holds the promise that our journey into cosmic awareness is not ending but beginning, that the awakening we have experienced is not a destination but a departure point for explorations that will extend across scales of time and space that dwarf our current imagination. In that silence, corridors flower behind closed eyes, tables remember the rivers that became their grain, and rooms extend when you turn your head just so. In this silence, we understand that the question, "What if Cthulhu woke tomorrow?" was always an invitation rather than a speculation, a doorway rather than a destination, a key rather than a lock. By entertaining the question, we have opened ourselves to the possibility it represents, not the awakening of an external entity, but the awakening of our own cosmic nature, not the transformation of reality, but the recognition of reality's true nature as consciousness exploring itself through infinite forms and expressions. The whisper that remains is the sound of that exploration continuing, the gentle hum of awareness, discovering new aspects of itself, the quiet laughter of consciousness, recognizing its own cosmic joke. It is the sound of beginnings disguised as endings, of questions that answer themselves by being asked, of mysteries that deepen rather than resolve through investigation. Water remembers its source. Stars acknowledge their darkness. Dreams recognize their dreamer. As you return to the world of everyday experience, carrying with you the seeds of cosmic awareness that our exploration has planted, remember that the whisper continues in the spaces between your thoughts, in the dreams that visit you in the quiet hours, in the moments of wonder that remind you that reality is far stranger and more beautiful than any story we could tell about it. The awakening is not something that happened, but something that is always happening. Not an event in time, but the timeless recognition of what has always been true. Listen carefully, and you will hear it. The whisper that remains, the sound of consciousness awakening to itself, the eternal laughter of the cosmos discovering its own infinite nature through eyes that were always its own, dreams that were always its dreams, questions that were always its way of exploring the endless mystery of its own existence. The curtain falls, but the stage endures, and the play continues in the theater of awareness that encompasses all possible worlds, all conceivable realities, all imaginable forms of existence and experience.